Back in 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, I was a willing salesman for the cause. I often repeated and honestly believed assurances of our unselfish motives.
We're not here to occupy an Arab land. We're not here to take their oil. We're not here to kill Arabs or take mosques or any of the other myriad of reasons.
Part of selling a war is recycling reasons that were effective for other wars, such as if we don't fight them there, we'll have to fight them here.
The central lesson of our time is that the appetite of aggression is never satisfied. To withdraw from one battlefield means only to prepare for the next.
The government has taken unprecedented measures to defend the homeland.
This is a different kind of war.
The first war of the 21st century.
There are no marching armies or solemn declarations.
It is not well known. It was not well understood. It is complex for people to comprehend.
Al-Qaeda is wounded, not destroyed. The scattered cells of the terrorist network still operate in many nations. And we know from daily intelligence that they continue to plot against free people.
We must confront serious dangers before they fully materialize.
There is no quick solution to the problem that we face there. I would not want to prophesy or predict whether it would be a matter of months or years or decades.
And we will continue to hunt down the enemy before he can strike.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
Saddam Hussein has not...
And whether you're selling cars or selling war, the pitchman is as important as the pitch.
...of this deadly material.
I was used to sell Operation Iraqi Freedom to reporters who were anxious to be seen as supportive of the troops, like me.
Let me ask you what you thought of all the questioning of Brigadier General Brooks during the course of his briefing today.
Well, I think you're right. But for more status than a lieutenant like me could offer, the Bush administration turned to then Secretary of State Colin Powell, a famously reluctant warrior, to close the sale for war at the United Nations.
The only credible member of the administration, the member who had poll ratings almost equivalent with Mother Teresa, was Colin Powell.
How important do you think Colin Powell's speech was on February 5th, 2003?
I think it was very important.
It was certainly important for me. I used the transcript of that speech as the blueprint for my assertions about the war.
We believe that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, that they had the will to use them against us.
Larry Wilkerson was Colin Powell's chief of staff at the time, a career Army officer with an impressive resume. He was charged with putting together the speech that Powell would deliver. It presented to the world the evidence for Saddam's weapons of mass destruction.
During that time, we were convinced, as was the Secretary, that what we were presenting at the UN was reasonably accurate, if not 100% accurate.
My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions.
We wanted multiple sources, and we wanted independent corroboration of the data we were presenting by those multiple sources.
A second source, a third source, a fourth source.
In this case, we were told there was, and there wasn't.
We know that Iraq has at least 7 of these mobile biological agent factories. This is evidence, not conjecture. This is true. This is all well documented. The gravity of this moment is matched by the gravity of the threat that Iraq's weapons of mass destruction pose to the world.
We find out later that this entire piece of evidence came from one man, codenamed Curveball. He was not a reliable source. He was not to be trusted.
We must not shrink.
Wilkerson says he felt devastated and deceived after watching the speech.
We must not fail in our duty and our responsibility.
I went outside and I said, we failed. I failed. That was a terrible presentation. It was all circumstantial. The only thing that was convincing about that was the fact that Colin Powell was giving it.
As the war in Iraq dragged on, the spin shifted from eliminating weapons of mass destruction and Saddam's ties to terrorism to freeing the Iraqi people and spreading democracy in the Middle East.
Get some guys, get these fucking reporters back.
We say it all the time. No spin, don't spin it. And we catch ourselves doing it. I catch myself doing it, taking an event and spinning it so strongly in one light that that I have to pull back and say, well, wait a second.
Americans don't want to feel they're going to bomb civilians who are cooking lunch in their kitchen.
Another critical theme in selling war to the American people is convincing them that we fight humanely, that we avoid killing civilians.
I think the Iraqi people have seen civilians being killed by this regime for a long time.
It's an assertion that I made repeatedly as a spokesperson for the war effort in Iraq.
We bombed the hell out of Baghdad with the most precision munitions in the world.
It really speaks to what a benevolent, powerful nation we are, the fact that we go to every length possible. I mean, when it comes to bombing, we do everything scientifically possible for the size of the munition, the angle of entry, everything we can do to avoid collateral damage to what we do on the battlefield with our rules of engagement, trying to avoid civilian casualties.
It's an assurance that has been repeated by others in conflict after conflict over the years. In Vietnam,
it is the policy of this government to bomb only military targets.
In Desert Storm.
We are not indiscriminately targeting civilian targets.
In the last couple of decades, 75 to 90% of those who die in a war are civilians.
There's ever been a conflict, the likes of Afghanistan or Iraq, where there has been as much respect for avoiding collateral damage and avoiding the killing of innocent people.
The most insidious twist in the art of selling war is the increasing use of private public relations companies.
Well, the government's using the private companies tremendously these days. They're paying millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars in contracts for these companies to do everything from putting messages on plastic water bottles to creating articles supposedly written by GIs but are really written by public relations people and put in newspapers and so forth.
James Bamford recently published an article in Rolling Stone magazine about the role of one very successful public relations man, John Rendon, who combined political savvy with advertising skills.
He opened up his own private consulting company, and he began being hired by countries, different countries around the world, and by candidates running for office in different countries. And he would bring sort of a Madison Avenue, flashy, a very sophisticated approach. Basically, he knew PR and he knew campaigns.
Bamford says Rendon played a role in the Panama conflict, promoting a candidate to replace Noriega. That he worked for the government of Kuwait during Desert Storm in '91, countering bad publicity about the Kuwaiti elite fleeing the country to posh resorts, while American soldiers were fighting to liberate it.
He had 20,000 signed Valentines go out to American troops. Sort of a heartwarming gesture. Well, it was all this PR stuff. The idea was to show through the media that the heart and mind of Kuwait is really behind this war. And again, it was a PR stunt. It was, I don't know if they'd ever even heard of a Valentine over there before.
Bamford claims that Rendon was involved with the Iraqi National Congress, a U.S.-backed government in exile, hoping to replace Saddam Hussein. John Rendon declined our request for an interview, but a spokesperson denied Bamford's claims. Is there a particular danger in using private PR firms?
Well, it's a great danger, yeah, because first of all, using private PR firms, they're not accountable to anybody. They're not accountable to Congress.
What's the problem with the government or the Pentagon specifically using private PR firms to promote these kind of messages?
Well, the problem is, you know, war shouldn't be sold to the American public. If there's a need for a war, it should be obvious to the American public, just like at Pearl Harbor.
These days, no one is waiting around for a Pearl Harbor, or even faking enemy attacks like the Gulf of Tonkin. Just the threat is enough.
It's one thing to pay for propaganda, it's another thing to pay for false propaganda. And the worst thing is to pay for false propaganda that gets us into a war. That's what happened in Iraq. The same thing could happen to Iran.
And so just as in 2002, everything was black and white, there was an aggressor against the forces of freedom that needed to step forward and take military action. Now we're in a phase of the agenda building for war where everything is black and white. Iran bad, rest of the United States equation good.
I would certainly watch out for any Iranian defectors coming out and saying, I've seen this and I've seen that and I know this and I know that, because I was there at the time.
It's a concern about which other critics agree.
Is there any argument for the case that the American people can't understand all the complexities at play, and so you give the American people what they want and you do what needs to be done?
I think the fear from the White House is really not that the public won't understand, but that they will. When a war can stand the light of day, then the president wouldn't need to engage in all of this spin and half-truths and deception to the American people.
The thing that bothers me the most is the spinning, is the cherry picking and the spinning.
We face an enemy of ruthless ambition, unconstrained by law.
And now the Iranian
world's
regime
free nation
or morality will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon.
For war to be sold, someone has to be ready to buy. So when the spin begins, remember the familiar warning. Caveat emptor. Buyer, beware.